Welcome to the podcast. Today, we are delighted to introduce Susan Needham, a seasoned expert in the data world. Susan serves as the Senior Manager in Data Governance at Auckland City Council and has been in data and analytics since 1987. Known for transforming complex and technical data into practical business strategies, she's worked across industries like banking, telco, media, and government. Recently, Susan embraced a new chapter by understanding her neurodiversity, adding a fresh perspective to her already impressive career. Please join me in welcoming Susan Needham. Thanks for joining us, Susan. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Mina, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today.
Cool. Can you share how your childhood and growing up experiences influenced your early interest in data and shaped the path you eventually took in tech and analytics world?
I grew up on a dairy farm in the Waikato and I had a fantastic childhood. In my teenage years, my parents also bought a business. So that was sort of a bit about my background. Now, on the farm, we had some good years and we had some more challenging years. And I realised quite early on that I liked the good years better. So that sort of made me, I think, in my teenage years, sort of realise that to do that, I'd have to apply myself and work hard. When I was in high school, I found that I had to work harder than my peers to actually get similar grades. So probably about Form 3, Form 4, somewhere around then, I realised that I was going to have to work hard. And to do that, because I was naturally a bit disorganised, I had to put some really good organisation strategies in place. So that meant, I could study, knew when my exams were, I'd study for them and I'd be organised and deliver things on time. That didn't come naturally, but that was something that I put in place at a very early age. And anyone who knows me now, people always comment on how well organised I am. And I think that was born out of that, putting those practices in at a young age and sort of persevering and fine-tuning them over time. I went to Ngaruahia High School, and I actually really enjoyed it there. It was a small school, about 700 children, and probably the equivalent of a Decile 1 or Decile 2 school, and very ethnically diverse. And, I think it suited my learning style. In some of my seventh form classes, there were only, I think, seventh form chemistry, there was only 3 of us in the class. So it meant I could ask a lot of questions and you got some individual attention, which I think was really valuable. And it was good to be in, smaller classes. And I realised that I was very good at maths and I absolutely really loved it. And even better, in sixth form, we got these computers at school, and I was very interested in the computers when they arrived. And everyone dived in and wanted to play computer games. I tried them for 5 minutes, realised I was hopeless at them, and then decided that I wanted to write code. In particular, in those days, it was basic code. And they actually allowed me to take a computer home, which is probably worth more than my car, driving very carefully down the road to get it home and plug it in at home and write some more basic code. So I was I was quite nerdy, but it was still really good. So where that led to was me doing a Bachelor of Science, and I majored in statistics, but I was an entrepreneurial teenager. So on top of that, I actually did a lot of business papers. So I sort of had that mix of business and technical, even from a young age. Now, I had a student holiday job when I was at university. One of them was in a charity. I had this job to type 5,000 envelopes, which sounds quite a daunting task, but I actually really enjoyed my time there. But what I noticed typing these envelopes is there was data quality issues everywhere. And so I set about recommendation to the manager that we do things to improve the data quality, which, looking back where my career has evolved to and getting in data governance, I had an interest in data quality from way back in the 1980s, before the concept of data governance as a career even existed. So yes, I got in early in there. Now, my first job out of university was at Statistics New Zealand. And I was actually there, did 5 different jobs over 10 years, and I really enjoyed my time there. It was a very diverse organisation. If you think of diversity now, it was ahead of its time in terms of the diversity and very forward thinking. And the work was really interested and suited my background. So, I was there for a number of years, and that sort of launched my career in data and in analytics. Now, as you mentioned, I've worked in, since then, 8 different companies covering 7 different industries, because I realised reasonably early on in my career that I wasn't really interested in climbing the career ladder in a conventional sense. I realised that I was more interested in delivering things. And actually, I was not hopeless at the politics. I just wanted to get on and do things. So, yeah, I have got to a certain level of management, but I do not want to sort of go up and, I don't have grand plans to become a GM or anything like that. So how I've got some interest in my career, because I've always wanted to stay in data, was to sort of change industries. However, over time, and this is where we get to sort of the neurodiversity coming in. During my childhood and working life, there were some things I found very easy and some things I found more challenging and I struggled with. And I always felt a bit different. It didn't concern me. I felt different. I just felt different. In the last few years, as you're probably aware, there has been a lot more discussion about neurodiversity in the media and coming out. And, because prior to then, you're sort of aware of it. And, I've known people who have ADHD, but they didn't sort of look like me or, they didn't seem like me. But you started to hear more the last few years. And then what happened is when I was at Westpac, I had some neurodiverse interns pass through my team. It was part of a program that existed, which is sadly just closing down this month. And, I wanted to support them. So I thought the way to support them is to actually understand, neurodiversity better. So I did some reading and I was thinking, this is quite interesting. So that led me to, it's just under a year ago, actually, that I got diagnosed with ADHD and mild autism. And then about September, I got diagnosed with dyslexia because as I got those diagnoses and then did some more reading, I thought, this dyslexia thing, that maybe that, I've got that as well. So then I led to that diagnosis. So it was really interesting because it helped me make sense of myself and understand a bit more about how my brain works. And I've still got a lot to learn. It's still in the early days, I say, being less than a year, but it's been a really interesting sort of journey. And I think the reason some of my symptoms weren't as obvious, because I think having that mix of ADHD, and it's the inattentive type, and autism, they almost cancel each other out a wee bit, because ADHD is going a million miles an hour and wanting change and action. The autistic side doesn't like change as much. So there's a lot going on in my head, believe me. But outwardly to others, it sort of helps mask some of those things. Even though internally there's a lot going on, outwardly it's sort of some of those things from a symptomatic point of view balance each other out. Now, a common trait of ADHD is to say what you think. And it's quite interesting because there is a lot of debate online around whether you should actually tell your organisation and others that you have ADHD, and a lot of people don't. But I think it's really good to get it out there and be talked more about it in a professional sense, because I think it is good for people to understand that others may have some of these challenges and that there's support and other people who are willing to speak up. So now, and also want to change the narrative. And I think, in terms of what I want to talk about today, recognising that I'm new to this and I've still got a lot to learn, and no two neurodiverse people will be the same. There are some people who really struggle, and it's not to say I haven't struggled. There are some challenges, but some people will have a more challenging time. So, this is just sort of my lived experience, I guess, in terms of how I've managed over the last 30 years plus in my working career.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
So now I don't know much about neurodiversity. So to an amateur like me, would you like to give a brief description about ADHD, autism, and dyslexia? So these 3 were the neurodiverse conditions that you were diagnosed with, right?
Yeah.
Are you comfortable sharing something a little bit more for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose with me, what I've always found is my brain is just going at 100 miles an hour. It just never stops. For example, I'll be walking down the street, I'll be listening to a podcast, and then I'll see something on a bus shelter which might make me think of something. My brain goes off on a tangent, and then I'll see a certain type of car or something, and my brain will just constantly just be switching. It's just like a million light bulbs sort of going off in my brain and switching focus. Now that can be great. On one hand, there's a lot going on up there, but on the other hand, it can be quite challenging because you want to focus in on one thing. And if you're sitting at work in a meeting and you think your brain's going all over the place, and then they say, so what do you think, Susan? It's like, shit, my brain was off on another tangent altogether. So that's actually very common with ADHD, is to have that. And other symptoms were things like, is hyperfocus. So we have the ability to, when we're really passionate about something or really into something, it's just like the whole world, normally I'm easily distracted, but it's just like everything else turns off and I can really get in and focus on something. And, which can be really good to sort of power through work. You can do a day's worth of work in an hour sometimes, in terms of when you really get into the zone. And that's commonly talked about with ADHD as well. Because of how our brains work and they're going at 100 miles an hour in different directions, you can sometimes just sort of think of something that's quite a different way of thinking about something or solving a problem, which can actually be really useful in an analytics type career. We can be known to be direct. We like to understand things, so it can ask a lot of questions. That's quite common as well. So that's sort of the ADHD side, and I'm sure there's lots of other things I haven't thought of on the spot. In terms of dyslexia, it's like words. So if I go and look at a page of writing, a lot of times if it's not well presented, it'll be like what I call word soup. I look at it, my eyes don't know where to look. So it's all over the place. And I can read very quickly. I mean, I could read a novel in a day, right? A typical sort of easy, nothing too intellectual, but say a Lee Child book I can read in a day. But there'll be a lot of facts, a lot of detail I miss as I'm going through. But that's fine for leisure reading. It's great. I can go on holiday and power through books. But when you're doing studying type reading, when you need to take it in, it's really hard because my brain just wants to take off at 100 miles an hour, but I need my brain to slow down and take it in, and it doesn't want to cooperate all the time. So, and then because the words, they're just swimming around on the page. I find things need to be presented clearly and simply, or I lose focus and attention. We'll talk more about, I'm sure, later about how what are some of the benefits of that as well. And from an autistic side, I only have it at the mild end of the spectrum, but it means that from a perspective of change, I like routine. And I like to know when things are going to happen. So, for example, if you fired some unexpected random questions at me today, it'll be sort of like, I really struggle with that. But if I've got information and I can plan in advance, then I'm perfectly fine. But it's, but then the ADHD side can like a bit of change. So that's why it's not as noticeable in me as it might be in people who are just autistic versus just ADHD. But I've got that bit of a mix. But it does mean that, as I say, there's a lot going on in my head. But the autistic side is around you like change. You don't like change as much. You like structure. You like routine. You like order. And if you've got more pronounced autism, there's some, there can be some more obvious sort of symptoms, around, I'm not, as I say, I can't really probably talk about that as clearly because it's not something I'm so familiar with, but yeah.
Cool. Now, having been officially diagnosed recently, how has this new understanding of yourself influenced your approach to data governance and analytics throughout your career?
Well, it's interesting because I only found out last year. So, I've done my career as I've done my career, but I think it's very much shaped my career. So, for example, as I mentioned, I worked as a number of years as an analyst, and I was never afraid to ask questions. And because that's how I understood things, because and it's a way of helping focus, because if you just listen, a lot of it will go over your head, but if you start to ask questions and get a dialogue going, it's how my brain sort of likes to take things in. And I also didn't mind, which is quite common, of challenging the status quo. And I can also spot patterns in data and look at things from a different perspective. So, when I'm looking at tables, I can spot things that others might miss, or just sort of think about things, as I say, a bit differently. In terms of the dyslexia, I think the ability, because I like things presented clearly and simply, because otherwise, as I say, it's very hard to understand. So when I present things, I make sure that they're presented clearly and simply. Sometimes they're not, but I'd like to think that a lot of times I do achieve that. And I think it helps make it more digestible for others. So I think that's why I've had a good relationship with business people over the years, because they're not always as technically literate. So what I do to make things sensible, understandable to me, also helps make it understandable to them. And I think with the ADHD, my eyes glaze over really easily. It's in terms of it's very hard to maintain my focus. So I try to make things engaging and interesting, because if I'm going to sleep presenting it, it's not going to help the audience. So it's it's something about trying to bring it to life and make it something that they can relate to. And in terms of the autistic side, I think that's what's driven my desire for things to be correct and accurate. If someone presents something at me and there's say a PowerPoint slide and it's got a spelling mistake in one word, it drives me crazy. It's like the whole slide, just sort of what they're talking about just goes out the window. I'm just focused on that one spelling mistake. It drives me crazy. But it's just that desire for things to be right. So I think that sort of led to me being quite interested in data quality. And even though I've only been in data governance since 2017, that's always been an interest of mine, right back to when I was, doing that student holiday job.
Nice. So since you began your career in 1987, what key changes have you observed in tech and data sectors? Like, how did they embrace neurodiversity?
It's interesting because, I'm speaking more generally, because it's only really been embraced, I suppose, a bit more the last few years in terms of what I've noticed. So my comments are more just in organisations in general, and I've obviously worked in the tech/data space in these different industries. So I think it's being talked around a lot more, and I think it's being embraced as a skill that's really useful in these types of careers within these workplaces. And I think some of them are realising that a number of staff they've had have potentially neurodiverse, and that they can see the advantages that those skills bring to their team and that diversity of thinking. So I think that's a really positive thing, but there's still a long way to go. And I think there'll be undiagnosed, because it's really difficult and it costs a lot of money to get a diagnosis. I mean, it would cost me probably somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 all up for a diagnosis, which a lot of people can't afford. And it's sad that it's so difficult. So there's probably a lot of undiagnosed people out there, who are struggling. So I think the extra discussion and realisation is going to be beneficial. But there's still a long way to go. But definitely it's being talked about in the tech and data space and in workplaces in general.
Yeah, as you described your experiences on dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, I could actually relate to some of it. I was like, oh, maybe I need to also think about going for a checkup or diagnosis.
Yeah.
So now you've also mentioned something about being able to simplify complex data, right, in your experience. Now, do you feel that your neurodiverse perspective enhances that ability?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is, as I say, because I'm doing work on data literacy at the moment, for example, and I think it's that ability to really break things down in a way that others can understand. And now it all makes sense in terms of why I've always had an interest in that, because if I can't understand it, and now I know why, because it's the dyslexia, then how are we going, how is people out there who know nothing about data going to understand it? So I think it's definitely helped, particularly in that space, and I think it's definitely the dyslexic side which has made that work really well for me, and hopefully for others who I talk to in the business. So I'm trying to get as enthusiastic about data as me.
So what unique strengths do neurodiverse individuals bring to roles as in data, governance, and analytics? And how can organizations leverage these strengths for their advantage?
I think diversity of thinking. I mean, in a team, you always should have diversity anyway, I think, because I think it brings, a range of, ethnicities, ages, and also, neurodiversity is one of those different sort of types of diversity. Because I think when you have a team working together with all sorts of different perspectives, if it's a well-functioning team, you end up with better outcomes. So I think that's really good. And I think in teams, autistic and ADHD people can be very direct, sometimes uncomfortably direct. But I think organisations should take that positively, or at least listen, because sometimes, even though it may not be delivered in a way that you might prefer, often what they say is right, and it is good to listen. And I've worked with some very direct people over the years who, in hindsight, I now know have been probably high likelihood of being autistic. And they're on the button, right? They're saying, they're reading the room, and they, very accurately, and what they're calling out is something that should be listened to. So, I encourage organisations to be open to that as well. And I think, having that diversity in terms of, say, the dyslexia thinking. I've had some, some staff who I've known have been diagnosed with dyslexia, and you think visually, and as I say, it's a different perspective as well. And I think you mentioned that hyper focus. In a crisis, having someone who can just sort of knuckle down and power through something is really good, or meet a deadline, or where deep thinking is required. It's really useful. Now, in terms of how organisations can help. Well, first you need neurodiverse staff, and I think a lot of hiring practices, can be challenging for neurodiverse staff, because some might have feel slightly anxious, and they might find the typical sort of interview sort of structure isn't necessarily as easy for them. And I think some organisations, I've heard of this, I haven't witnessed it myself, some will actually send out the interview questions in advance so people can have an opportunity to think. And for some that would actually be really helpful. Some organisations may be more open to that than others, but it's just thinking things through from a, if we want the diversity of thought and you want to do this, it's just sort of look through some of those practices. And it's making sure, I like lots of detail. If I've got to be somewhere at an interview, I want to know exactly where I've got to go, and who I'm meeting with, and any other information which can just sort of help quieten my brain down and make it an easier experience. And I think in an interview situation, an interview in a cafe would be a nightmare for me. Having it in a nice, quiet place and with minimal distractions, would be easier. I mean, if you put me in a cafe, I'd cope, but it wouldn't be as easy, right? So it's letting me sort of be my best self in terms of being able to sort of talk a bit more easily without those distractions. And I think having the right organisation culture, because some organisation cultures, I think, are going to be more open to this than others. Some tend to sort of focus more on groupthink versus actually being open to different ways of thinking and approaching things. Oh, we've always done it that way. It's a term I don't like to hear, because I do like to sort of think outside the square. I think having internal networks is really good. Both at Westpac and Auckland Council, we've had neurodiversity networks, and that's really good for for getting the word out there. And it's interesting. We've got Viva engaged at Auckland Council, and I think they've done some statistics recently, and I'm sure the Neurodiverse Network was the most active Viva engaged group out there. So there's a lot of interest in there, and I think staff actually really value the capacity to share information. From an employment brand perspective, I think all these things do get talked about, and it's good to know, and it's something you can talk about in interviews if you know that someone is neurodiverse.
So you mentioned about the recruitment or the interview process, right? So it's
Yep.
a bit different and it can be a bit challenging for neurodiverse professionals. I've heard the same about being difficult for women as well, because
Yeah.
the entire environment, the structure, everything has been designed for predominantly male workforce. And the recent years, you start to see more and more women in the tech space, especially,
Yeah.
right? So, do you think being neurodiverse and being a woman can actually be a double whammy and can cause a lot more stress for women attending interviews?
It's not something I've personally noticed or felt, but with my mix of sort of things going on in my head, I'm very unemotional and I sometimes miss things. So, there might have been situations which some people with ADHD can be more emotional than average. I'm at the other end of the spectrum and less emotional. So I don't get, I can be pretty relaxed in some situations. So things can go over my head, or I may not notice something which other people might be a bit more concerned about or feel uncomfortable about. But in interviews, I've been interviewed, by a mix of genders. I think maybe on the data sector, it's a bit more diverse gender-wise than in the tech sector. But I haven't it's not something I've noticed, but I do know that in the tech sector there tends to be more, more male, a higher percentage of males than you get in data.
Yeah. So, what are the common misconceptions about neurodiversity in
Yeah,
workplaces? And how do you think leaders can address these misunderstandings?
yeah. I think some people think that will be difficult to manage or won't fit in because there's a lot of stuff out there in the media about, ADHD being, an 8-year-old boy running rampant somewhere and out of control. But, we sort of, by the time we get to adult years, you sort of, that those tendencies might manifest in different ways. You could just have a higher energy level or, there can be other things. So I think what you see in a lot of media around some of these things is more from a child perspective and not what is, will necessarily come out in the workplace. So I think don't judge, so be open to, to some different staff who are neurodiverse and the fact that they can bring a lot of skills to the job. And I think some other misconceptions are that we're all disorganised. And in reality, as I mentioned, I am extremely organised because I've had to be. And I think if you do have staff who are struggling with organisation, help them figure out what works for them, because it took me a number of years to actually, as technology changed, I'm better at managing my workday using physical printed material rather than online because I need that visual reminder. But some people prefer online. So I think a bit of coaching there to actually help support staff rather than just say, oh, they're disorganised. I think sometimes people just need a bit of help. And I think it's also helping them not take on too much. I know I have a tendency to take on too much, and sometimes I just need a gentle reminder that, I might need to scale back my expectations of what I'm going to deliver, a bit. Another one is that dyslexics can't spell or are not good proofreaders. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, if you give me a policy document to read, I will be slower, but I will do a very good job because I'm rereading things a few times. I will do a very good job of doing that. It's just harder for me. But I will pick up things that other people will not pick up. Another one is that, some of us, we can be quiet. I mean, I am quite introverted, that we can be quiet and withdrawn and we're just not going to fit in a team. And I think sometimes it's just giving us an opportunity to come out of our shell. And in a group situation, it's, you see this operate in some teams better than others because sometimes the loudest voices get the most say. And you might have someone who's a bit quieter there sitting back with this fantastic idea, but they don't have the courage to actually come forward and actually say that. So I think it's giving them that opportunity, because just because someone's not saying anything doesn't mean that they haven't got good ideas. And something else, and it's something I had a manager talk to me years ago, critique me on, because interrupting, and trust me, it comes up a lot and as a challenge for people with ADHD. You're not necessarily good at reading up on social cues. We're so excited about getting your word in, you just you want to say it, blurt it out before you forget it, because it's very easy to forget it because your brain's going on to the next thing. So you want to say it. So it's like try to just be understanding in the sense that, we're not trying to be rude. It is a challenge for us. So there'll be some things, quirky types of behaviour that it's just good to be understanding, and maybe if if something's going a bit off kilter, let us know, but just be aware that we're not doing things on purpose. But in terms of how organisations, because obviously, you want organisations to understand how neurodiverse people tick. And it's like Neurodiversity Awareness Week next week, and I know at Auckland Council we've got a number of events planned, and and we have one of our Viva Engage groups is aimed. It's for people who are allies of neurodiverse people. So it's getting the word out there, not just to the neurodiverse people, but the wider organisation about some of the challenges that we face and some of the benefits that we can bring, and try and get that dialogue going, because it's just neurodiverse people on our Viva Engage group talking to each other about the challenges is not as good as actually getting the word out there more broadly around this, and get some of that more broader dialogue going, which is definitely, there's a lot more of it these days, but I think there's more there's more that can be done.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to young professionals in tech, especially those who are neurodiverse, looking to build a career in data analytics and governance?
Something I would suggest is, don't be afraid. Sometimes it can be difficult to do, is get out there, reach out to people on LinkedIn. I've been approached over the years, and, I've met up with a number of sort of students or, young grads, and, had coffee with them. And in some cases, I've helped connect some of them up and get jobs, because I know how hard it is to get your first job. But once you're on that career ladder, it's a lot easier. Another one is attend meetups and networking events. Again, it can be tough if you're a bit more introverted and shy, but it is a really good way of getting out there and meeting people. And, I think there's also, there's even neurodiversity meetups if you're interested in that sort of thing. Haven't managed to get to one yet, but there's also obviously tech type meetups as well. So I think, look for, different ways to get your name out there. And I think from a culture fit, I think when you're looking at organisations, it can be quite mentally, if you're in the wrong place that's not supportive, it's going to be hard work, right? But if you're in the right one, I think it's a lot easier. So I think, obviously in the current job market, that might be a bit more challenging, but try and sort of find the organisation that's going to be a good fit for you. And I think if you are someone who's neurodiverse and struggling with work-life organisation, which I think really work hard at it, because I think it's a really good skill. You don't want to be late to job interviews. You need to sort of get your application in on time, all those types of skills. So I think, working on that is going to sort of help you to sort of get on that career ladder and, get into those first few jobs.
Nice. Now, looking ahead, what emerging trends in the data and tech sector do you believe will further unlock the potential of neurodiverse talent? And can you share an example?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting, came out through COVID, is working from home. And I think a lot of, and I've read a few studies on this actually, a lot of neurodiverse people actually found it really, really good, and made things a lot less stressful for them, because being in a noisy office can be very distracting, and can be mentally quite tough, because you don't really want to sit there with headphones on all day. Some people with some types of ADHD who are very extroverted do like being in the office, but for a lot of us it is challenging. So I think having more acceptance of working from home in many jobs and many companies has been really good. And obviously I think AI is helping. I know, I take handwritten notes in meetings because it helps me stay focused and not forget things, both of which are important. But other people do struggle with writing notes. I think some of the AI transcription tools will help. Another one is around AI in terms of, now sometimes myself, you might have a lot of ideas, but you're struggling to get them into a coherent sort of story or, way of sort of in a way that makes sense. And I think some of the new AI tools are going to help, obviously being conscious of what you're posting up from a security sort of privacy perspective. But, there's some of those tools I think, can be quite helpful. Sometimes if I've got a paragraph or something, and I know it's not quite reading right, you can throw it up into Chat GPT or similar, and you end up with something that just sort of pulls the key points out, and it's very helpful.
Nice.
That's some of the. I think AI is going to be quite interesting.
When you look back at your career and look back at your younger self, is there something that you think now, if I was diagnosed at a younger age, I would have been a bit more forgiving
Yeah.
or nicer to my younger self? Is there anything like that you can think of?
Yeah, I think what I did is because, there were some things I found very easy in my career, and there are some things I struggled with, and I knew I took longer with, right? But you want to overcompensate. And this is really common with neurodiverse people. It's called masking. And it can mean that, a lot of, it's not uncommon for people to have burnout because you're trying to sort of almost overcompensate or to fit in a way that doesn't come naturally to you. So me being organized, I have to work really hard at being organized, but I actually do enjoy being organized, but it takes a lot of effort, right? So it's having to do that. And I think what I would do, tell my younger self is, it's not good to work all those ridiculous hours and try and have a bit more balance, and that the skills I bring to the job in other ways, don't worry if this thing over here takes a touch longer because this area over here, you might operate 25% faster because of skills in other areas. So that would be one thing. But I have been reflecting on whether if I'd going through the education system now, whether I'd, because if I went through it now, I'd probably be picked up, right? But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it meant I had to sort of figure things out myself, but I had to work damn hard. So it's put in place some very good, practices in terms of my work ethic and things, which hasn't always been good for my health, as I mentioned. But on the other hand, it's given me some really good, life and coping skills and resilience. And I'm torn on as to whether, now that would be, going through and getting extra time in exams, that would be helpful. But also on the other hand, it's, I'm still undecided on that one. It's interesting.
Yeah, I have worked with you and I know how organized you are. And it's been easy working with you because you have always been relaxed and you've always been very acceptance of everyone around you.
Yeah.
So that really made you very special and a special leader to be working with.
Oh, thank you, Mina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan, for your time today. Any closing thoughts or remarks you would like to make?
I think thanks for the opportunity. I think it's interesting. You've obviously spoken to 25 odd people, and I'm sure that some of them that you've spoken to are probably being neurodiverse. If you look at the percentage, I think 10% of the population are meant to be dyslexic. So I think it's good to be able to sort of be comfortable for me to be comfortable to talk about it, because I think more of us need to be talking about it. And it frustrates me when you hear people say, "Oh, it's just becoming a thing these days. It's just the label people are doing. It's not it's not a serious condition, or it's not necessarily that serious." So I think the more we've got from the counter side to actually say it is something, yes, but some of us can struggle more than others, but it doesn't necessarily have to hold you back. And you can be very successful. But recognising that some people will need some more support, and we can work together to help make it easier for them.
That's very nice. Thank you, Susan. Thanks so much for your time. It was lovely to have this conversation with you.